Hello, guys. It's your buddy Isaac, and today I'm going to be reacting to Freedom of Economic Education's Common Sense Soapbox Preemptive, the real reason your rent is so high. So, if you guys know me, you know that I like economics. You know I've been interested in that field for a while, and I've been kind of thinking about doing sort of a video on this for a while, but it never really seems to come up, or I tend to get worried about, well, what if they copyright me or whatever. So at this point, it's like, you know what, to hell with it. I'll just give it a shot. Let's see what they had to say.
Meet Jessica. Jessica works at a local tech company. She likes her job, but she's always felt like she could do more. So she was very excited when she got a job offer from a tech startup in the big city. But
That was your first bad move. Never go to a big city. Large cities tend to have high rents for a number of reasons. One, primarily because, or so they claim, that there's only so much space. But I think they'll get into
was
that
one
here.
really big problem. Even with the higher salary they offered, there was no way she could afford to pay rent.
Yeah, that's about right. So, just to let you know, there's a rant incoming. You'll
In the
get
big
it.
city.
But I
This
don't
is
want to.
unfair. Greedy landlords are exploiting vulnerable renters with high prices. It should be illegal to charge this much.
This is a common demand people make, and on the surface it sounds like a good idea.
Because it is one?
Not exactly.
How'd I know that was coming?
The price of anything depends heavily on supply and demand.
Actually, no. And so this is another little rant I'm gonna have to make. Not price of everything is gonna be supply and demand. That's textbook. And there's something I have to actually explain, that there are differences between textbook and real life. And one of the most prime examples of that being the case is digital video games. There might be a reason why a physical copy of something like this is might be 60, 70 some dollars, okay? It costs money to distribute it, it costs money to print the label, it costs money to get the disc, it costs money to etch the disc, so on and so forth. And there's only so many copies of these that exist in the world. So it makes sense as to why they might be a little expensive. Now, digital video games, for example, are an infinite supply, meaning that it doesn't matter how many copies of a digital video game people buy, there is always more. It is literally, in the digital supply, there is no such thing as a shortage or a finite amount. So, even if you want to say that there's costs for programmers and stuff like that, which I do agree. Ow! Thanks, cat. If anything, the digital copies of games should still be about half the price of a physical copy, because there's less money being involved in the manufacture of that game as a digital copy, as well as the fact that there's an infinite supply. There's no reason for a digital copy of a video game to be 100 to 80 bucks. There might be a reason why a physical copy of a game, especially a collector's edition, might be $80 to $100, because a lot of your physical copies that are collector's editions have things like a steelbook, or there's something that is added to it that is a collector's item. Usually a steelbook, an art book. Usually you have access to things like concept art, what have you. You don't get really access to that from a digital copy. So, not everything is supply and demand. Unfortunately, in an ideal world, prices would be always based on supply and demand. but unfortunately, we don't live in an ideal world. And don't get me wrong, I'm not a socialist. I am absolutely for real capitalism, actual capitalism, but unfortunately in America, we don't have actual capitalism.
The reason rent is so high in most big cities is because a lot of people want to live there, but there isn't enough housing. So that means what is available is pretty expensive.
You're telling me.
Normally, when the
Not quite. Because supply and demand, again, supply and demand is fine and dandy for things like a CD game. For something like an apartment or for food at a restaurant, that should be more or less something based on your cost, not on the demand that a whole bunch of people want to live here. If your complex costs you $5,000 a month with insurance, maintenance, and everything else, and you have 20 units, that's $250 worth of unit cost per unit. Okay? Reasonably, you can rent each unit for $750 and get a reasonable amount of profit, covering your costs and having cash left over. Now, I will say this was made 5 years ago, so I get the idea that what they're trying to say is, well, everything's so expensive because there's not enough of it and there's such a high demand. Right now, but here in 2023, they've actually put out and built a ton of luxury apartments that they still want that kind of price for, that are sitting currently empty. Not only that, but evictions in the United States have gone up by 30% because rents have continued to go up despite wages and income for people not going up to be able to actually match the cost of rent, car payments, phone payments, what have you. Because landlords, when you're talking about rent, it's not just you pay this flat amount a month forever. Landlords take to do things like increase the price of rent every single month. So you might start out in an apartment that started out reasonable. Let's go back to my example, okay? If I was a landlord, and let's say I have multiple units, different varying size, okay? Studio, 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom. Now, and all I need to do is get $750 a month per unit. So to be reasonable, I would charge $500 for the studio apartment, $750 for the 1 bedroom, and $1,000 for the 2 bedroom. That still lets me make my $750 a unit without any problem, and I still make my profits. There's also another benefit to that. By keeping my prices reasonable, I actually protect myself in some cases against economic disturbances or economic crises. Because now my prices are based against my costs, which usually stay stagnant. I can then have more likelihood of people living there. See, the other end of this that's not being discussed here is that property owners, if nobody's renting for them, that cost is coming out of their pockets. They still have to pay for the property tax, the mortgage, the maintenance and upkeep of the building. That's still coming out of their pocket whether someone's living there or not. So it actually becomes intrinsic and good for business to actually charge enough where you get profit, but it's not so high that people just can't afford it. Because then, if you charge more than what people can afford, you're going to be stuck with a whole bunch of empty buildings. And nobody's going to rent from you.
price of something, like rent, is very high, it's a signal that there's money to be made providing that thing to others. So entrepreneurs start making more of that thing so they can make money.
Not necessarily. another problem with that is that there's a few things, especially with large cities, you have different places and zones. So when you're talking about property zoning, right? Basically, the city, within the city limit, can tell you what kind of building you can build on that property. So if you're in the industrial zone, you can only build industrial buildings. You cannot build apartments. You cannot build any other kind of building there. If you are in a commercial zone, you can only build commercial buildings. So, every city only has X amount of residential property. That's kind of the catch-22 there. So, even if entrepreneurs see that, oh, there might be money make here, or what's more accurate is a lot of your entrepreneurs are going to sit back and watch to see if the people charging that are actually going to be able to consistently get it. They're also going to be watching for how high the eviction rate's going to be, how they're going to look at the actual. In fact, if you're a really smart entrepreneur, you're going to look at the demographic of the place you're going to. You're going to look at what is the average income of that location. What are the odds? And more specifically, what demographics am I going to be marketing to, or is going to be more likely to rent my property? These actually have some parts to play in what people get rent-wise.
And the more people are making a thing, the more the price for it decreases, as the suppliers start competing.
And again, another mix of textbook versus reality. Because reality is, unfortunately, this would be in the ideal scenario. Okay? Ideally, entrepreneurs would move in, they'd make things cheaper by providing more and more. There would be a bidding war between who can do the cheapest, and everybody wins. Problem is, because this is America and we don't really have genuine capitalism, and I always have to sit there and tell people we don't have genuine capitalism. What we have is a bunch of corporations and landlords who all work together, who all know each other because they all go to the same golf course, or they all go to the same social events. So what they do is they don't charge based on their costs or based on what have you. They charge based on what the other guy's charging. The problem is that a lot of your market prices are heavily manipulated by the people in that market. And if someone steps out of line, let's say Joe steps out of line and starts charging people less than Bob and everybody else, Joe ends up in a whole heap of trouble. See, that's kind of the problem, is there are a lot of cases where corporations could make a lot more money doing something, but they won't because they're afraid of stepping on someone's toes. Now, ideally, in a truly capitalist universe, you wouldn't give a hoot about stepping on your competitor's toes because you're there to make money. You're not there to make his life easy.
With each other, but rent control ruins that.
Ruin? How could rent control ruin that?
Government already makes creating housing way more expensive than it needs to be through regulatory burdens, but when the owners can charge whatever rent seems fair to them, there's at least a chance for them to make back the money they invested and hopefully earn a profit. But when the government puts a cap on the price of housing, it becomes almost impossible to earn a profit off of it. So yeah.
No. It's not almost impossible. It's, again, unfortunately, and I can see what they're going with, but it's all the costs, and surely that's much. And it's like, yeah, I get that. But the reality is that the builders pay all that through their mortgages anyway. So that cost is just flat based on your mortgage. So again, if it costs, if your mortgage is two to $5,000 a month, that's what your cost should be based on. If you can't figure out how to do and get money and make your money back from that, probably shouldn't be involved in business to start with. Entrepreneurs are smart little bastards. Folks like that usually are clever and figure out ways on how to either work around those costs so that governments can give them a little buddy stuff, okay? But the problem is, again, is you have a lot of corporations and businesses that are not charging money based on their costs. Again, you're dealing with the ideal here. There's a difference, again, between textbook ideal and reality.
Yeah, the very few people who manage to get rent-controlled places to live are happy with their below-market price housing. But it ultimately makes rent...
But it's also no shit, because a lot of the time when that happens, here's something that I've already said. Market prices are very easily manipulated. Okay? For example, the market price of housing in terms of homes has been heavily manipulated by banks like BlackRock, who came in and bought all of the low-level housing for cash and then now charge extortionate amounts for rent. Market prices are not actually the bar you want to measure yourself on. In fact, if anything, as an entrepreneur, you're not going to be looking to get market price anyway, because you're smart enough to realize that nobody wants to pay market price. You wouldn't pay market price for anything, and sure as hell wouldn't expect your customers to do so. And two, finding ways to charge less than market price is good for you as an entrepreneur, because A, you either keep people in your building, so you're making a profit regardless of the time. B, you're beating out your competition, which means that your competition's customers are more likely to be your customers because you're charging less for similar or the same price. Just ask a gentleman called Cornelius Vanderbilt how that went. He used to run a ferry business across the river in New York. He bankrupted a federally backed monopoly by providing better boats, safer trips at a fraction of the cost of his competition. Even though the quote-unquote market price was set by his competition, he kicked their ass by doing the smart thing.
Rent more expensive for everyone else, like Jessica here, because builders know that the juice just isn't worth the squeeze. So the supply stays low, the demand stays high, and prices just keep going up.
I guess that makes sense, but if government makes all these rules that cause the price of living to get so high, why don't they just stop?
Why indeed?
But, and there we go. Like, oh, it's the government's fault. Don't you see? The regulations are why everything is so pricey. It's like, yeah, like I've already said, there's a huge difference between textbook and reality. Textbook is the ideal of what it's supposed to be like. Textbook is the concept of this is how it's supposed to work. This is how it really works. Because again, unfortunately, I do have to state that there's a lot of politics in that. And by the way, the very regulations that they're talking about are there not just because of voters, because the rental companies and the people who own the apartments funded that. Here's a little surprise for you. The reason why they do that is to keep other people out so they don't build in their territory. Funny thing about Western businesses, unfortunately, they don't like competition. They do not like competing. And so they get buddy-buddy with local and federal governments to set up regulations to basically hamstring anybody coming in or trying to start a business in their territory. They're also the ones that control the market prices of everything. They also control a lot of other crap. So, don't get me wrong, Seamus and these guys aren't trying to mislead you for any reason. In an ideal world, they would be correct, okay? Fortunately, we don't live in the ideal world. We live in reality. Reality is a lot harder to deal with. Unfortunately, until we can start decoupling and getting rid of the marriage of extremely greedy corporations, banks, and our federal and state and local governments, things are still going to continue to be high. Now, things might just be taking a turn against them, because at the end of the day, the problems for a lot of people are starting to stack up, and it's starting to bite them in the ass. And something that I've always said is this: the market always wins. Doesn't matter what deals you made with the government. Doesn't matter if you think that you can manipulate the market price to be super high. At the end of the day, if the people that you want to give you their money cannot either afford to give you that amount of money, or they see that what you are trying to give them for that price is nowhere in any way valuable to that price, they won't do it. The customer is always right in the matter of taste. And if the customer says that that is not of that value, guess who's SOL? But I hope to see you guys next video, and thanks for watching. Stay safe, my friends. We'll get back to our normal schedule of gaming as usual. So if you liked this little reaction video, leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and don't forget to hit that notification bell. And let me know down in the comment section. Doodles!